Let's carry on with our frame example file and the iteration that you selected to generate a 3D model from. So once this button turns green, we'll simply left-click on it and select Open Design. Once Compute is finished, you can now see we have a new untitled design. We have all of our original preserved regions, and we have the rest of the frame that is this nice sculpted body. And if we expand our bodies folder, you can see that it's all one unified solid body. So everything here looks pretty good. What we want to do at this point is save our file so that way it can be used in other instances. So we're going to continue. We're going to save it to a lesson 4 folder, and I'm going to call this Generative Outcome Frame. Once your frame has been saved, you can go ahead and move on to the next lesson. Let's carry on with the file from our previous example, and let's talk about editing a generative outcome model. So we're going to navigate back to the frame model itself, and we're going to take a look at the timeline. In the timeline, we have these base features that are created for our obstacles and our preserves, and then we have this feature called organic. Now this is a T-spline form, and this is how the overall frame was created. If we right-click on this and edit, this will bring us into the form menu inside of our design workspace, and we can see what the geometry looks like. All the regions that are attached to our preserves are kind of a different color. They have a light blue attached to them, and that's because those are frozen sections. That means we can't select them or manipulate them unless we go to Modify and we unfreeze them. However, I want to make sure that I leave all of the attachment points as is, and I only want to focus on geometry. The region that I want to focus on mainly is going to be this region that intersects with, in this case, it's the portion of the upper rear section of the cylinder. So what I want to do is I want to select all of this geometry, and I want to move it. I'm going to do this using Modify, Edit Form, and notice that it did select all the way through, and I'm going to use something called Soft Modification. The soft modification allows me to dictate how far I want the effects of this move to go. So you can see everything in red and pink and white are going to move at various levels, and anything past that is not going to move. I can modify this distance to be more localized or more broad. For example, if I set it to 50 millimeters, you can see that it's moving quite a bit more geometry, but it will be more gradual. When we look at this from a top view and I start to pull this geometry out, we can get an idea of what we're working with here. And you can see how it's pulling that geometry out just a little bit. And this might mean that with soft modification, we want to go a bit farther. I'm going to take it all the way out to 150, and then I'll start to manipulate the geometry again. So as I start to pull it out now, it's making a much more gradual change throughout here. Once I'm happy with that move, I'm going to say OK. And we can see the ghosted body underneath is the original, and the new body is shown here. Another thing I like to do is I like to change the view or the display mode. I like to change it to a box display mode when I'm looking at this file on the screen, and this helps me understand what the underlying patch geometry is like. So as we look back here, you can see that we have some inconsistencies with some of the layout in the patch, and we could potentially move some of those around and smooth out the geometry. So this is really what we're looking for here. We want to avoid any regions where we might have some overlap, and we can start manipulating them by using Edit Form. So again, I can select a vertex and I can pull this out and start to alleviate potential issues I have with geometry. Now as we're looking at this, you can see that it appears to be coming to a point, but we can use that display mode utility to go back and forth between smooth and the box display. And we can also use quick keys on the keyboard. Alt plus the number 1 will go into box mode, and Alt and the number 3 will go into smooth display mode. So that can be done at any point in time while you're designing. So some of the regions have a very thin edge on them, and it could potentially cause problems when we go to manufacture. So these are areas where we'd really want to focus our attention. And again, I'm going to go back to box mode, and it can kind of highlight this problem for us. From our marking menu, I'm going to go to Edit Form, and I'm going to start to manipulate this geometry. I'm going to grab this vertex, pull it back slightly, and I'm going to grab this one as well and pull it back slightly. And while I'm in here, I'll go back to smooth display mode and see what this looks like while I'm making the changes. So everything looks pretty good there. Once I'm happy with all my changes, I can select Finish Form. It'll take me back into my standard solid modeling tools in the design workspace, and I can continue going back through and selecting faces and deleting those bad patches that might have happened where we were up against any of our obstacle regions. And once we're happy with all of our changes, we want to make sure that we save our file and we have all of the updates captured. Once we save our file and save our new version, we will have to go back to our original assembly. Because we have a distributed design and we have linked the files together, we do need to make sure that we tell the software which version of that file we want to use. In this case, version 2 has a bit more clearance for the cylinder head, and we're instantly prompted that we have an out-of-date reference. So we can update this by simply clicking on this icon. It can update it to our most current version, and we should see the frame push out slightly away from the motor here. So now that we have that new change, we can rotate around. We do see that we have a slight amount of clearance or a gap here now between the frame and the motor. So this is exactly what we were looking for to make sure that we don't have any areas that could potentially cause problems when we start to assemble the design. So there's plenty of clearance in there now. We can assemble everything as needed, and we don't have to worry about any of those overlaps. We also have plenty of room in there for airbox and throttle bodies. We do have some clearance issues with the shock though, and if we zoom in on this area, you can see here that the shock itself is intersecting. Now again, the shock was a basic representation, so before any geometry changes were made, we would want to make sure that we source the shock for this application and make sure that we are accurately representing its geometry. Because in this case, most shocks will have this collar down a little bit lower and the spring down a little bit lower as well, so likely interference wouldn't be a problem. But I'm happy with everything so far. I'm going to go back to a home view and I'm going to save my file so we can move on to the next step.